You might know that I don't love the concept of a gaming smartphone, charging a premium for what is often a small upgrade in performance at the expense of things that I'd consider more important. This is different, much closer to how I think it should be done. We're talking about the Red Magic Mars, and probably the most important thing you need to know about it is that it starts at $399. And for some perspective, that compares to $899 for the Asus ROG Phone. Is it any less powerful? Not really, but I'll come to this. At nearly 10mm, the Mars is somewhat chunky, but at the same time structurally sound, and I do appreciate having a surface that you don't need to wipe every time you use it. If you're into the aesthetic, you won't find many smartphones as adventurously designed as this one, but at the same time, the angular build does mean it's a serious table wobbler, so you can't really use it when it's lying flat. It has a headphone jack, fingerprint scanner, and the same configurable light strip that we saw on last year's variant. Is it useful? No, not really. But is it cool? Yeah, I'll give it that. But there are so many gaming features, you might be quite surprised at what they've managed to fit in at this price, and it brings up quite an interesting point, so let's break it down. You've got capacitive shoulder buttons, 7.1 virtual surround sound audio, a dedicated slider to enter gaming mode, and a 4D vibration engine. The phone also implements 3 forms of cooling, a vapor heatsink, an air chamber inside for passive airflow, and the use of a metal alloy that supposedly dissipates 64% more heat than glass. And the results do speak for themselves. It keeps temperatures quite consistent, and that's useful if you're gaming for hours at a time. It can prevent your chip having to throttle down its performance because it's overheating. Even the gaming software has been streamlined. I wouldn't go as far as to call it beautiful, but a stark improvement over last year. One flick of this switch also takes you to a redesigned gaming hub, which works really well, and it makes all the features you might want really simple to access. So here's the thing, a lot of this gaming stuff, you could take it or leave it. It'll make a difference if you're a hardcore PUBG gamer who has 3-hour sessions at a time, but less so if you're more of a 20 minutes of Brawl Stars during a commute kind of gamer. Much of it is not particularly useful or even compatible with many games. There's only 2 right now that actively support the vibration feature. But what I like about this, as opposed to other gaming phones, is that even if you used none of this, it is still good value for money. It runs Android 9 out the box, has a dual speaker setup with really spacious sound, and a pretty respectable 3800 mAh battery. Nothing comes for free, and in making this so affordable, I'd say there are 3 main compromises. The first is that the base model here has the Snapdragon 845 with 6 gigs of RAM, and don't get me wrong, that is a good spec. It's only 2 gigs of RAM off smartphones that were twice the price last year, but that's just it. It is last year's tech. I imagine the 845 is pretty cheap now, as it's towards the end of its main production cycle, so that might be one of the contributing factors to this phone's surprisingly low price. But I don't think this should be a deal breaker. Yes, on one hand it's ironic that a phone made for gaming is using last year's components, but right now there's no application where you'll feel any kind of bottleneck, and remember that for similar amounts of money, a lot of phones are still using mid-range chips, also from last year. The second thing is that it's clear that the camera wasn't a priority here. With a single 16-megapixel sensor, you'll miss out on portrait mode and any kind of optical zoom. But it's not bad. In well-lit conditions, photos look refined, punchy, and dynamic, and the saving grace is the phone's rock-bottom price. It's not even close to iPhone or Huawei flagship pricing, so it can get away with not being compared to them. There are definitely even $400 phones with more flexible camera systems, but the Red Magic Mars can at least hold its own against most of them. The third gripe here is display. This is a 6-inch LCD panel and probably the most noticeable compromise on the phone. It lacks the deep colors of an OLED display, it doesn't sport the super high refresh rates of other gaming phones, and it's got a mediocre screen-to-body ratio of 78.5%. It makes sense, there had to be a compromise, but at the same time, we've seen $200 phones with nearly 85% display. If it were up to me, display would be pretty much the top priority, well above LED strips and capacitive shoulder buttons, but this aspect is pretty subjective. What would you prioritize? So, on balance, the Red Magic Mars is not without flaws, and if you started listing everything that's missing, you'd be going for a while. But if you take a step back, you'll see it offers 80% of what the ROG phone did last year in terms of performance, cooling, gaming features, even the camera, at just over 40% of the price. and that's something. I would say though that if the gaming features don't interest you at all, but you still want the performance, then the Pocophone F1 takes the cake in terms of overall bang for your buck. Thanks a lot for watching guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.